Let's record. There we go. It should be going now. So let me just let me first say, just please remember to. I have a feeling there's some people who have been attending who have not sent me emails about attendance, and I want you to really do that because I record it and I keep an eye on it, right?
Okay.
And you know, I don't penalize students for not being here because it's not obligatory as part of the class you signed up for, but it doesn't hurt you to be here. Let's put it that way. And if you're here, I want you to be able to be recognized for that. And I look at it in the context of everything else, all your other work for the semester. So let me also say I've put up, did I put up materials for the midterm yet or no? I didn't. I know I didn't do that. I did it for my Baruch class. Anyway, so in the next few days, I will be putting up information about the midterm. It's not going to be till basically toward the end of the month, like maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks before spring break. So, and let me just say, it's going to be an essay exam where you've got 2 essay questions that you have to answer in basically what I'm calling essay form. And I'm going to provide a lot of information about exactly what I'm asking you. But it's going to be something that you spend at least a week working on, you know, in chunks of time. And it will be graded very carefully and you'll get a lot of feedback on it. And you'll get individual feedback. And then afterward, I'll also make some general remarks that basically everybody in the class could focus on a little more, things to work on, pointers for the final exam. And so the midterm and the final are exactly the same format. 2 essay questions. The essay questions for the midterm, one is a question about sapiens, and it's very related to the reading response. You're going to see questions that look familiar to you. It's not going to be, there's nothing on the midterm that's going to be like a surprise, right? And then there's going to be a question dealing with Aristotle's 3 concepts of friendship, or 3 types of friendship. And that is what we're going to start to cover next week. And we'll spend at least 2 weeks looking at Aristotle's concept of friendship. So I'm going to have to talk about Aristotle and what you read today, or what you didn't read today, depending on what you got to. But obviously Aristotle is challenging to read. Obviously, he writes in a manner that is not always accessible, and sometimes it's a little bit dry, right? He doesn't always write in the most exciting way. And especially because he's a philosopher and he's kind of doing a technical analysis of things that we tend to think a little more intuitively about. We tend to think a little more emotionally about, and he's this very kind of rational analysis. It's a logos, right? It's a rational account of human happiness and ultimately friendship. So Giuliani, send me an email. Let me get back to you on what you're talking about, because that's a lot of stuff to read right now. So what was I saying? So Aristotle starts out a little bit dry, and he seems like a little bit formal and like a little too rational for his own good. It's not the way we talk. When we talk about happiness, we talk about our own feelings about what it is. And he's a philosopher trying to get to a kind of basically a scientific explanation of what he thinks it is. However, despite his appearance of being like a little bit, let's call him a square. Does everybody know that concept of like someone who's a square? That's an old-fashioned term. We don't really use it that much anymore. Anyone know that concept?
I've heard it a few times. Does it do you mean like an odd person?
Actually, no, not at all.
Okay.
And I think it comes from like Foursquare. Like something that's Foursquare is straightened out. And so someone who's a square is like kind of like a goody two shoes who's not rebellious and doesn't break the rules, and like it kind of logic, could be kind of logical and follows, how things are supposed to be done. right? So like back in the 50s and 60s, there were square people and there were hip people. And hip people were like the people who smoked marijuana and like, played jazz music. And square people were like, they wore their button down shirts and their ties, and they tucked their shirts in, and looked proper and stuff, a little too proper maybe. So Aristotle seems a little dry sometimes, but when we get into particularly book 9, right? So you see that the ethics is divided up into 10 books, and they're basically thematic. Each book covers basically a different topic, and the books are equivalent to chapters. So really, when you think about these 10 books of the ethics, you can think of them in terms of 10 chapters. And that's pretty much it. When in book 8, he starts his discussion of friendship, right? And he talks about what it is in general terms and its significance to human life in general, and also to human happiness. And then he goes into these 3 types of friendship, right? That are really kind of the centerpiece of his analysis. But in book 9, he moves from these kind of like general categories of friendship to like starting to get into some of the weeds of problems that exist in real world relationships. And even though he's writing in a kind of dry way, he has some really penetrating psychological insights into some of the challenges that confront us in our relationships with other people, right? So don't be fooled by Aristotle's kind of like formality. He is a people person underneath it all, and he really has a sense for human beings and what they're like. Yeah. So today, number one, I'm going to say it again, make sure to email me about attendance so that you can get credit. Rukeya, do you have to email me every Wednesday? Well, the answer is yes, because not everybody necessarily shows up. So, right, when you email me, every time you show up, you email me because you're confirming that specific day that you were here. Right? Absolutely. So you got to email me every week you're here, right? Because, I mean, you might not be here every week, right? And then in that case, you wouldn't email me, right? It's simple as that. Okay. So what do we want to cover?
I've missed 3 emails, so can I state in my email
Yeah.
that-
I'm not going to penalize. Just so that's what I meant at the beginning of the class. Email me to let me know.
Okay.
Right. And maybe even look at a calendar and just give me, the
The
dates.
dates that I did not. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about at the beginning. Important.
Okay.
Okay, because I know there are people who are here that haven't emailed me for sure. Okay, so we want to today look at Aristotle's notion of human nature and human happiness, right? So human nature, he goes on to give these 3 opinions about happiness, which are very often called the 3 lives. And that's in book 1, chapter 5. Book 1, chapter 5. And these 3 lives or 3 opinions about happiness, it's important to recognize, are not Aristotle's opinion necessarily. It's more like if you took a survey of society, all the definitions of happiness that people could provide would basically fall into these 3 categories, right? What are they? What are those 3 lives or those 3 opinions about happiness? Who got to the text?
Is it wisdom?
Yeah, okay, so the life of?
Politics, contemplation.
Okay, good, so that's 2 of them. Now we have to dissect, you say like happiness as politics, what are you smoking? we have to understand exactly what he means when he says that. And once you understand what he's saying about the political life being an opinion about happiness, you'll understand the thing he's talking about, because it's something we all know and understand. So there's the life of contemplation. There's the life of politics, which has a specific dynamic to it. And then what's the other life?
Pleasure.
Pleasure.
Yeah, the life of pleasure. Very good. What kind of pleasure is he talking about when he talks about the life of pleasure?
Talking about wealth.
Money and wealth.
Not necessarily. I mean, money's an interesting thing. It can buy you different stuff. Money is alluded to at various points, but in these three lives, he actually doesn't talk about money. It's interesting. And he makes it very clear what the life of pleasure refers to. What kind of pleasures? What category of pleasures? Let me put it this way. When he talks about human nature, one of the first observations he makes about human nature is that our nature consists of two components, a body and a soul. And a body is just the physical husk that is us, our genes, our physiognomy, our anatomy, and so on and so forth. But our soul is basically a manifestation of all those psychological elements that we identify as ourselves. And I think most human beings, when you think about it and you say, what am I? You identify yourself not with your body exactly, but rather you identify yourself with the psychological attributes that make you, you. And that what really is you is not really directly your body, but it's the elements of your soul, right? So the Greek word for soul is psyche, and that's the root word of psychology. And what is psychology? Literally, technically, it's the science of the soul, although no scientist, no psychologist would ever use that expression these days, but that's actually what their discipline is, to try to understand that thing that is a product. So for the Greeks and for Aristotle, Aristotle doesn't really believe in like an immortal soul. He doesn't really believe in an immaterial soul. Like it's not some magical essence that's like floating, or when you die, it like floats away from you and goes to heaven or something. It's an extension and a product of the body, but it's somehow something more than the body. And it is something kind of invisible. Like you can see the body, and the way you see the soul is through like what the body does and what the body says. And from what it does, your actions, your deeds, and what you say, you can infer some type of psychology, some type of essential identity of someone's psychology. Okay, so now I'm going to come back. He talks about the life of pleasure. Is he talking about the pleasures of the body or the pleasures of the soul?
The soul.
I'm going to disagree with you. So here's one problem. Pleasure could mean pleasure of the body, or pleasure could mean pleasure of the soul. When he talks about these three lives, and he talks about the life of pleasure, he means specifically pleasures of the body, pleasures of the body, right? And actually he demotes this life as the lowest of the three. Actually, when you're talking about the political life and the contemplative life, what kind of pleasures do they provide? If contemplation gives us wisdom, and that's some kind of pleasure, what kind of pleasure is it?
The knowledge.
Of the soul.
Yeah, well, no, you're getting too fancy. Is it a pleasure of the body or pleasure of the soul?
Soul.
Yeah, absolutely. So for him, the soul would include like what we call the heart and the mind, right? The soul is going to consist of reason on the one hand and passions on the other. And when we use the word mind, we tend to refer to like kind of the calculating, reasoning part of our psychology. And obviously, when we talk about emotions, we're talking about the heart. We're talking about those spontaneous feelings that we have that are generated, that are part of the, you know, a central part of our psychological identity, right? Of these three types of happiness or opinions about happiness, does he think they're all equal? Life, the life of pleasure, the life of politics, and the life of contemplation? Does he say something like this? Happiness is just about whatever the person says it is. To each his own. Everybody's got their own flavor and they're entitled to their own opinion, and nobody's opinion is better than anybody else's. What do you think? Does he think all opinions about happiness are equal? Is the life of bodily pleasure equal to the life of contemplation for Aristotle? Any thoughts? Silence. Silence. Do you think, let me ask this and then we'll move forward. And so I know I'm asking it cold. So I said at the outset that these three opinions manifest in these three lives: life of pleasure, life of politics, life of contemplation. These are opinions that exist out in society that Aristotle, he's kind of acting like a sociologist, just kind of recording like the public opinion poll about what people think happiness is. And depending on who you are, generally speaking, you have a different conception of happiness. And I think his idea here is that these are the three main ideas out in society, and that all the subsidiary conceptions of happiness can really be fitted into one of these three. Like I could make an argument that politics, well, both the life of pleasure and the life of politics involve some love of money, right? The life of pleasure, you need money to buy the things that are physically pleasurable. I don't know, wine, a nice house, a nice couch, you know, iPhones and iPads and, you know, big screen TVs and stuff that you stare at for many hours at a time. Politics, of course, you need money. And of course, politicians like to have money, and it's a sign of status to have money, and so on and so forth. So question, what is Aristotle's understanding of happiness? I'm just kind of going to some of the reading response questions right now. What is Aristotle's understanding of happiness? By which I mean, what is his definition of it? What does he think it really is? Because he takes these opinions and he says, well, not all opinions are created equal. And what I want is not an opinion of what happiness is. I want to determine what the truth of what happiness really is. And this is interesting. He believes that there is one ultimate, highest conception of happiness. He doesn't deny that other people have opinions, right? The point is, he thinks there's a superior conception of happiness. And this is the interesting thing. It's going to be, for him, the one that is most consistent with human nature. So you wonder why at the beginning of his early part of a discussion, he starts talking about human nature, and he says plants are like this, animals are like this, human beings are like this. And it's in book 1, beginning of chapter 7. And it's very often described as the function argument, because he describes the function of plants animals, and human beings. Like what do they do and how do they live? And based on what a human being is, i.e. human nature, and what they do with that nature, something specific and special compared to plants and animals, he says, therefore, this must be human happiness. And this is the idea of happiness that is most consistent with what a human being really is. Okay, now that I've given all that preamble, any thoughts about what you think Aristotle's concept of happiness is? So I'm going to read Giuliani's statement here. It's a nice statement. She says, I'm sorry, happiness, according to Aristotle, lies in gaining all the commodities. Now she uses this word commodities. I'm going to use a different word because it's the word Aristotle uses. And Aristotle has a kind of technical language here, and it's really important to know and understand the words he's using. And we're going to spend some time really analyzing some of those words, and other ones that are less important, we're going to let go. But he uses the word goods. And of course, we're familiar with this word good or goods from the politics, right? The polis or the city-state, its goal is to pursue the collective good. Or really another way of saying it is the collective happiness. For Aristotle, the highest commodity in life, or the highest good, is going to be human happiness. It's the thing for the sake of which we do everything else, right? Why do we stay healthy and keep ourselves healthy? Why do we get married? Why do we make money? Why do we have children? Why do we do whatever we do? Because we want to be happy. And happiness turns out to be the cause. And this when you think about this, this is a dumb moment. This is not a deep insight, but he points it out, and he makes some really common sense, Captain Obvious observations about human beings that are important to keep in mind. And one of them is that everything you do is for the sake of your own happiness. Whoop. Sorry about that. Which is to say that, why do you wake up on time and go to work? Why do you do all the things we just talked about? Stay healthy, make money, because you want to be happy, duh. And happiness is the final goal. It is the ultimate purpose of human life. And the word we used last week to talk about a goal or an end is a telos, right? So the couple had a telos. It had a purpose, a goal, a function, and that was procreation. And that's part of survival and self-preservation. We said the household satisfies everyday needs. Those everyday needs become the telos of the household, right? The village satisfied, he describes it as needs which are other than everyday, but by which he means, I think, longer term needs. And then the polis is the only community that he believes can satisfy the need of human happiness itself. Whereas the other needs satisfied in the household deal with the needs of the body. Happiness is a need or good of the soul, right? So that Aristotle has a conception of all these different types of goods. There are goods of the body, like strength, like you're attractive, like quickness, all those physical attributes someone might have, goods of the body. There are goods of the soul, like wisdom and knowledge and moral virtues, right? And we'll talk about what virtue is when we get into it. And so they're goods of the body, goods of the soul, and they're also external goods. And when he talks about external goods and having external goods, and he does that later in book 1, all he means by external goods are things external to you and your body that are physical things that you can possess in the world, right? And here Giuliani calls them commodities, which is basically a synonym for goods, but commodities only really refers to like kind of economic objects, like, I don't know, food or a car or a house, something like that. For Aristotle, there are many different types of goods. So health, well, what is health? It is a good of the what?
The body.
Body.
Yeah, it's a good of the body. It's as simple as that. Once you think about what Aristotle's saying, it starts to become kind of obvious what he's saying. But of course, he doesn't say it in an obvious way. That's always the catch with Aristotle. Okay, so what is happiness? He describes happiness as the highest human good. It's the most important. It's more important than any other good. Because, and how do you know that? Imagine I'm a Martian that comes down to the planet and I ask Charity, why do you work? Right? Why do you work? And she says, I work because I want to have money. I need money. And he said, well, why do you need money? He said, I need money to pay my bills and to pay my rent and to take care of my kids. And then you say, well, why do you have children? And Charity says, I have children because they make me happy and I want to be happy. And then the next question from the Martian is, well, why do you want to be happy? What's the answer to that question when the Martian comes down from Mars and asks a human being why you want to be happy? Don't think too hard. What kind of question is it to ask a human being why you want to be happy?
It's redundant.
It's redundant. That's good. How else might we describe it? It's what?
It's like the ultimate thing that everybody wants to be is to be happy.
Yeah. And if someone asks you why you want that, like, what's the response that you should give them? Well, I would argue, Eric, wanting to be happy is not a choice. It's just what we are, right? We may choose different conceptions of happiness, right? We're all going to choose different paths in life, and that path we choose has everything to do with our conception of happiness, right? But we don't choose to want to be happy itself. So remember here, until we define what happiness is, all it is a general category that we all know we want, but we don't know what the frick it is. This is one of the problems with human life. We know we want it, but we don't know what it is. Let me come back to the Martian for a second. You ask, why do you want money? You got an answer for that. I got to pay my bills. Why do you want to pay your bills? Because you got to take care of your family. Why do you want family? Because I want to be happy. Why do you want to be happy? You say to the Martian, if you are asking me why I want to be happy, you don't get it. And that's why you're a Martian and you're not a human being. There's no real, yeah, you said redundant. I would kind of use the word like tautology, which means like, it just is. The fact that we want to be happy is just a product of our human nature. It's not something we choose. And then you say, why do you want to be happy? Because I'm a human being and that's the way it is. And if you don't get that, I can't help you. Right? So now let's go to Giuliani's, because what was the question? What is the question here? The question is, what is Aristotle's definition of happiness? Because he doesn't state it in the most direct way. Let's be clear. So Giuliani says, Happiness, according to Aristotle, lies in gaining all the commodities, health, money, education, friends, and so on that contribute to the perfection of human nature and the richness of human experience through the course of a lifetime. Giuliani, where did you get that definition from? Did you look on Wikipedia or something? You got that just from reading the Ethics, book 1 and books 10? Oh, book 10, very good. Not everybody kind of gets through book 10. All right. So now so Giuliani has demonstrated she's like on top of her reading. Is Giuliani correct or incorrect in her explanation of Aristotle's understanding of happiness? Does anybody want to jump into the breach there? No. Okay, we'll turn to the text in a few minutes, but I want to quiz people first a little bit. Let me backtrack to something she said here. She said, let's just put it this way. Part of what happiness is having all the things you need: health, wealth, education, friends. Let's forget about that perfection of human nature for a second. Does Aristotle think happiness consists of simply having health, money, education, and friends? Yes or no? Any thoughts? Okay, I got everybody very silent here. All right, so let's just talk about a few things, and then we'll get to reading. Being moral. So Emily, so my question was, does having money, health, friends, and so on, is that what Aristotle means by happiness? And so you had, where does being moral fit into human happiness for Aristotle? What's your opinion? So look, this is a challenging text. When I ask you these questions, I'm not expecting you to like nail the answer from the text. I'm asking your opinion, what you kind of sensed from what he was saying. All right, let me ask this question, and I'd like a bunch of people to respond, verbally, orally. Forget about Aristotle's understanding of happiness for a minute. We're going to discover that his conception of happiness is probably noticeably different in certain ways than the way we modern people tend to envision what happiness is. If I asked you all, because I'm asking now, what for you is happiness, or what type of thing is it? What is happiness? What is your own personal understanding of what happiness is? So to appreciate what Aristotle's saying, it's actually really important that we consider our own opinion about what we have thought for our whole conscious life about what happiness is, because of course all human beings have very powerful opinions about what for them it constitutes their own happiness. What kind of thing is happiness to us? How do we define it in general terms? Nobody's thought about this thing that's the biggest thing in our life, that's the highest human good, that is the thing for the sake of which we do all else, as Aristotle says. The thing for the, what is Aristotle saying when he says happiness is the thing for which we do all else? What he's saying, I said it before, every action in your life is some way directed toward being beneficial, toward contributing to your well-being, aka your happiness. All right, so Giuliani says happiness is to have health and to have family around you in one piece. Let me ask this. I want other people's opinions. What is happiness to you? You know, Aristotle's not going to be, I just said it, but I'm going to say it one more time. Aristotle's not going to be as interesting as he could be if we don't bring our own opinions to what he's saying. I mean, we're going to be forced to grapple with what he specifically is saying. But once you do that, you want to compare it to your own opinion. Daniel, I'm sorry.
I was actually just gonna say wealth and family and friends.
Okay, wealth and family. So certain, what Aristotle would call different types of goods. So wealth and family. Let me ask you this. What is money good for? What is money good for?
Well, we need it for everything that we have to get, like food, water, and paying for our bills, etc.
Okay, good. So, you know, we're going to discover that there's two types of goods that are at work in contributing to our happiness. There are goods of the body. We need things to sustain our body, right? Remember, he said in the Politics, the polis comes into existence for the sake of mere life, he calls it, but it remains in existence for the sake of the good life. And when Aristotle says the good life, he's talking about happiness. But let's backtrack. He says the polis comes into existence to serve the needs of mere life. When he uses this expression, mere life, he's talking about survival, right? The economy. I mean, what is the thing that provides us with all the needs of the body? I know we don't think of him as needs of the body, but food, shelter, you know, all those things that sustain our bodies. We just call them goods of the body, or rather external goods that are for the benefit of the body, I should say. When he says the needs of mere life, he's talking about the economic system. The polis has the economic system of exchange of goods that serves your body, right? That we're all profoundly familiar with. You work, you get the money, and you pay the bills for the food, the shelter, and so on and so forth, right? And so money is an interesting type of good, and Aristotle has all these types of goods. He's got goods of the body, goods of the soul, and external goods. But then he has also goods that are means, MEANS, and goods that are ends in themselves, and some goods that are both means and ends. A good that is an end in itself is good for its own sake. Is money a good for its own sake? Do we pursue money just to have money itself?
No.
Let's just say most people, not really. But I think there certainly are people that money ends up being like just the very fact that you have, say, a lot of it. They have determined that's good for its own sake. Aristotle recognizes, I mean, let's ask Aristotle's not naive. He's a realist. And that's what's great about him. He's not cynical, but he's a realist. Can you be happy without money? This is a funny question. Can you be happy without money? Can you achieve happiness without money? Ashley says yes. Galen says no.
That's a tricky one.
Well, let's answer the question this way. You obviously need to satisfy the needs of your body, And that requires some resources, external goods, he calls them. If you don't get the resources to nourish yourself, you're going to die. And if you're dead, you certainly can't be happy. On the other hand, there are some people who can live with very little money and still be content, and they just have enough money to get the necessities they need. Whereas another person decides that like, that's a miserable life and they need all kinds of bling and, cash to buy it. So it partly depends on the person. Yeah, like priests or nuns, very good. And it's interesting, the person who lives the contemplative life, like we're going to see Socrates, we've already seen Socrates in Plato's Republic, we're going to see him again in the Symposium, right? And Socrates turns out to be a guy who really doesn't need a whole lot of resources to get by. And what he cares about is the contemplative life of philosophy, right? And the life of philosophy is a rather cheap life, because once you kept yourself alive, there's not a whole lot of equipment you need to do it. You don't need like a tennis court or a football field. You don't need to buy like a tracksuit to do it. All you need to do is have your brain and to think, and maybe have some friends to talk about stuff, right? So it's actually a very frugal existence. And so Aristotle he's definitely not against money, but he recognizes that basically money is just a tool to get other things that are the things you really want. And the person who is pursuing money for its own sake really misses the function of money. The function of money is to buy stuff, to get the things you need to then achieve happiness, whatever it may be. Okay. Other opinions about happiness. Can I have a couple more opinions about happiness? Because right now, nobody's in agreement with Aristotle. He doesn't deny that money and family are important. There's no doubt about that. But he doesn't think it's the highest form of happiness. So this is interesting. Rukkaya says to be satisfied, happiness is to be satisfied with whatever you have. Now that's interesting, because whatever you have, oh, this is really interesting because Aristotle gets in this in book 1. What is the cause of whatever you have? Can anyone give me that answer? What is the cause of what you have? What has brought your life to the situation where you have what you have? Why is it that you have what you have versus something else? Any thoughts? Okay, so Rukkaya says when you don't have the ability to change your situation. So one aspect of why you have what you have is what, Yalen, 1 second, very good. One aspect is chance, or we could use the word fortune. There are certain forces in life that are outside your control. You can't change, you can't decide the family you come from and how rich they are, or how good or bad they are, or whether your parents stayed married. You have no say over any of that, right? So the one thing that affects our happiness is chance, right? Which is just a word to sum up all those things that are outside of our control that we can't make otherwise. And then the other half of it is going to be our actions, right? And Aristotle is going to invoke the term virtue, which has to do with the quality or the excellence of our actions. So why do we have what we have? It's a very simple answer he gives. On one hand, we do have the power to change certain things in our life. Like maybe we can go get another job and make more money, but then there are other things that we can't possibly control. And he recognizes that there are serious problems to achieving happiness because there are all kinds of things out of our control. But our actions, for Aristotle, are one thing that should be under our control. And actions, our actions, how we live. When we use the word action, what we're talking about is the choices we make and the actions we take as the result of those choices. And that all sums up to how we live. Do we live like this? Do we live like that? Do we live rich, poor? Do we live a life of moral virtue and character, or do we live the opposite? An ignoble life, a base life, he's going to call it. Question, is happiness a feeling? Because think about it. We talk about I feel happy. We tend to think of happiness as a feeling of contentment, a feeling of a type of pleasure. And I think we would call it an emotional pleasure. Is happiness a feeling, like you're living your life and you just say to yourself, I feel good about my life, therefore I feel happy. And that's what happiness is. Ashley says yes. Other people, this is your opinion. This shouldn't be hard. What do other people think? Is happiness a feeling?
I'd say yeah. Yes.
Okay, Daniel says yes. Ashley says yes. You can feel happy when you can feel happy, and when you can't feel happy, you don't feel happy. Other people's opinion. Is happiness a feeling, like a kind of emotional state of mind? No other opinions? Bobakar, what do you think? Are you there? Can everybody speak? I know there's some people who can't speak because they're in certain circumstances. Bubakar, can you speak? With sound and words?
I say yes. It's kind of loud where I'm at right now.
Okay,
I'm at
sure,
work.
got it. I understand. All righty. So now we're gonna flip it around. Does Aristotle understand happiness? Got it, Luis. Does Aristotle understand happiness as a feeling of contentment? Is happiness a feeling for Aristotle? This is really important. Emily says no. What do other people think? Tanya, what do you think? Are you there, Tanya? Does Aristotle think happiness is a feeling? Because many of us, let's just say many of us, have kind of agreed that we think happiness is a feeling. Is it a feeling for Aristotle? Charity, what do you think? Does Aristotle think happiness is a feeling?
Yes.
Yes.
It's something that you feel it within you.
What about Mame Kade? Is happiness a feeling for Aristotle? I want you all to go on record here. Mame Kade says no. What about Christian? Is happiness a feeling for Aristotle? Are you there, Christian? No, she says no. Who else am I going to pick on? Yalen, did you already say no? Did you answer this question? What's your opinion, Yalen? Is happiness a feeling for Aristotle? No, Ashley says no, not for Aristotle. I'm sorry?
Sorry, I will say no because we said
Oh, let's just pause for 1 second there.
all right.
Do we all agree it's no? Aristotle, happiness is not a feeling. All right, I'm going to say it. The no's have it. The no's are correct. Now, are positive emotions, are pleasurable and satisfying emotions going to be connected with happiness for Aristotle? I sure as heck hope so. Otherwise, it's a really awful conception of happiness. Like, who the hell wants to feel unhappy when you're supposed to be quote unquote happy? The thing, it's not that you're not going to have positive feelings when Aristotle, in Aristotle's understanding of happiness, the point is they are not the focus of his conception of happiness. Something else is, and the feelings are just to kind of long for the ride. What did you want to say, Yalen?
According to Aristotle, he said the actions, the decision we make is according to our happiness. So it cannot be a feeling.
Okay, so here's the I don't know, is it the $60,000 question? If happiness is not directly about feelings, what is it about? What is it about?
I think
It is
not-
about an end result. The question is, what kind of end result is it?
I think having a good relationship with the divine.
Where does he say that?
That's what I'm thinking.
Now, if I were a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim, I would definitely say that a standard definition from their point of view would be, what kind of relationship with the divine?
A good, close.
Yeah. And let's just use the word God, right? Because those three religions, they just, it's God or Yahweh or what have you, Allah, so on. All right. So Aristotle does not seem to have a theological conception of happiness. It's not about our relationship with a divine supernatural being. It's very much a this worldly conception of happiness. That doesn't mean it's about money, sex, and drugs either. Doesn't mean it's about bodily pleasures. Although he doesn't have a problem with sex. He's not a Christian. He doesn't see the body as sinful or anything like that. It's more a matter of priority. He doesn't have a problem with money. It's not that there's anything wrong with the money. It's that money is just not the most important thing. It sits in a kind of order of rank, a kind of hierarchy of human goods. Okay. Ashley says, okay, Giuliani and Ashley together. This is Aristotle's answer. For Aristotle, happiness is not a feeling. Happiness is the thing that happens when you live a certain way, right? And in a sense, when you live in a certain way, you are by definition happy, right? So happiness for Aristotle is not having something and having stuff, even including friends and family. Happiness is about being a certain way. Happiness is about doing certain things. And yes, family and friends are going to be instrumental in what you do, but they're not the end either, right? The end of your life is not the other people. They rather assist you in achieving your end, which is your own happiness, which is when he talks about, he says, happiness is an activity of the rational soul. He says it a little differently than that, but you're right. But when he uses the word activity, he's talking about doing stuff. It's an awkward word, activity. He says happiness is rational activity of the soul in book 1, chapter 7, right? When he talks about rational activity of the soul, what he's really talking about is doing things a certain way. And more generally, he's talking about living in a certain way. So you can just kind of scratch out the word activity and talk about living in accord with reason. And Ashley is absolutely right. Happiness is not something that plops in your lap like winning the lottery, right? Happiness for Aristotle is an accomplishment. It's something you earn. It's something you work for. It's something you achieve. But it's kind of like when you're working toward it, you kind of have it at the same time. If you're living in the right way, which is he's going to describe in the text, essentially that's synonymous. It's the same thing as being happy. So happiness is absolutely an achievement. It's not something that just comes to you. It's not something that just falls in your lap. And to this extent, by making happiness an achievement, it puts it under your own powers as much as possible. It's something you can do to change, or it's something you can you have control over to make happen. Okay. And then happiness has something to do with the perfection, going back to what Giuliani said before, something about the perfection of you as a human being. What the heck is he talking about? Let me just say a few things here. The other book is called The Politics, and politics has to do with, the root word is polis, right? City state, right? And politics, on one hand, has to do with the things that are important to the life of the city state. And anything that is political is something that impinges on the public life and affects most people in the city, right? Therefore, it's a political issue rather than, say, a private issue. It's a public issue rather than a private issue, right? So that's what politics is. It's just the business of the polis and dealing with the things that affect most people that you make legislation about, right? Should we pass? Everybody goes to the gas tank right now and goes, holy shit, I don't have $5 to spend on a gallon of gasoline, and everybody's affected. So let's go to Washington and pass a bill to lower gas prices so we can live better, because the inflation is ruining everybody's paycheck. It's basically making that paycheck much smaller without you realizing it exactly. But politics is also, for Aristotle, the science of addressing the concerns of the political life of the city, right? And politics is ultimately, for Aristotle, it's the science of the happiness of the city at large. So when you talk about like the common good of all the people, or you talk about the common interest or the common weal, what you're really talking about is the collective well-being or the collective happiness of the people. So politics is determined to produce human happiness on the collective scale. Ethics, if you want a definition, is the science of human happiness, but not on the collective scale. It's on the level of the individual. It's on the level of individual. I want you to understand the meaning of this word so you understand not only what's in this book, but why it is there. For example, if ethics is a science of human happiness, why is a discussion of friendship in this book? Why is that? I mean, when you think about it, it's not going to be too complicated, but it's important to consider. So ethics is part of moral philosophy, and it's a subdivision of political science that studies what virtue is. We'll talk about that, whatever virtue is, and what constitutes good character and how it contributes to human happiness. So this issue of character and good character is really important. So ethics as an adjective has to do with morals, morality, and expressing character, right? Ethos is connected with habits and human character, which I'll talk about more in just a second. Some people have good character and some people have bad character, right? And to talk about someone's character, is like you're talking about their kind of their moral makeup. You're not so much talking about their personality and their kind of like idiosyncrasies and kind of what they're like, although it's not, there's not a total dividing line there. But when you're talking about someone's character, you're talking about their moral fiber, right? And normally if you say someone has character, you by definition mean they have good character, right? They're upstanding, they're righteous people. They do the right thing in situations where they might do, they could do the wrong thing if they wanted, but they don't because they want to do the right thing. Habits. How is it, let me ask a funny question. How is it that people come to have good character? There are two main elements to how people come to have good character. How do people become good people? Interesting question. Don't you want to be a good person? I mean, Aristotle's going to say that human happiness is kind of the same as being a decent, good person of a certain kind. So if we want to be happy, we want to be good people. If we want to be good people, we need to know how to do it. How do you become a good person? Take it back to when you're a child. How do you learn right from wrong? How do you learn to do the right thing rather than the wrong thing? Nobody knows?
When you are a child and you do a bad thing, your parents direct you as to do what is right.
Yeah, what do you call it when they get you to do what is right? What are some words we would use to describe them encouraging you or conditioning you to do what's right rather than what's wrong? What's that process? What do you do with a dog that pees in a house and you don't want it to pee there? What do?
You train them.
You train it. What do you do with little kids?
You train them.
You train them, for Christ's sake, right? And the fancy word is you habituate them, right? Through what? Through rewards and punishments. The child does the right thing and you reward them. They do the wrong thing, you punish them. And the reward reminds them that when they do the right thing, they're going to get something, so they'll want to do it again. And when they do the wrong thing, they get punished. And then the next time they have that impulse to do the wrong thing, they start scratching their head and say, wait a second here. I don't want to get punished like I did last time, right? And it gets ingrained in you, right? So ethos is connected with the idea of habits. How do people become good people? They have to have good habits, and becoming good involves habituation, doing something over and over again in the context of the boundaries of rewards and punishments. If you think about sports, how do you get good at shooting a basketball or throwing a football? You do it through habituation, which means training that happens over and over and over and over again. And when you do it wrong, the coach says, hey, you're doing it wrong, change it. And then when you're doing it right, they say, nice job, do it again, habituation over and over again. So let me just step forward here. And the Greek word for character, this is really interesting. It's like, what is a letter? It's a character, right? That's one meaning of the word character, and they're connected. So in ancient Greek, character literally means an engraved mark, like a word, a letter on a page, right? And what is it? The letter on the page is like stamped on the page, right? So what's this connection with habit and character, right? And when the idea here is that habit is the thing that shapes your character. It's the thing that engraves a certain disposition into you. So your parents, we could even use a scar is like a little too strong, but it leaves it. The way you're trained by your parents leaves an impression on you about how to carry yourself. And when you're trained enough, you don't have to think about what's right and wrong. You just do it, right? So character has this interesting thing of you're habituated by your training and it's impressed upon you. It's inscribed upon you through this training. Good character. Of course, we can add that character is a mixture of nature and nurture. It's a little bit like the genetics you're born with and certain people are born with certain problems, like they do, they have tendencies to do certain bad things by nature and not by circumstance. And then the other aspect is the training you receive. So nature and nurture. Okay, so this is what ethics is really about. It's the science of human happiness, but happiness comes through the habituation of a person's character to make them good in a certain way. Aristotle says in Book 1, Chapter 7, that happiness is rational activity in accord with virtue. Rational activity in accord with virtue. So happiness has some connection with virtue, right? And we want to become good people. What does it mean for Aristotle to become good? Any thoughts about that? What makes us good in Aristotle's eyes? We obviously don't want to be bad. Let me ask this. If we become morally virtuous or morally good, does that mean we're going to be happy as Aristotle understands it? Is being a good little boy or girl good enough for Aristotle in terms of human happiness?
No.
You say no. Interesting. Why not? What else is he concerned with beside being morally virtuous?
I don't know. I was just going back to how he said it's like an accomplishment. And so I felt like children and that kind of it's too kind of like premature. I don't know. I'm confusing myself.
Okay, so this is an interesting question. We're gonna have to, when Aristotle says, happiness is perfecting your own human nature, or let's just call it being a good human being, right? What exactly is he talking about? Okay, so let me go forward. Aristotle in the beginning of Book 8 says this. He says, without friends, no one would choose to live, even if he possessed all other goods. I know we didn't read this for today, but I want to connect this issue of friendship with happiness right now. And here in this statement, he does that really clearly without using the word happiness, but it's lurking there. What does he mean by this statement? Without friends, no one would choose to live, even if he or she possessed all other goods.
The need for social interaction or with others is more important, or like
More important than what?
goods or money.
Yeah, so what kind of goods is he talking about here, do you think? All other goods. What kind of goods might he be talking about?
Happiness?
Well, definitely not. Happiness is like the ultimate thing. And obviously, I think we get it by this statement that friends are connected with human happiness. Without friends, no one would choose to even live, even if they possessed all other goods.
You're saying after you've been able to accomplish whatever that you have, you still need somebody.
Yeah, you need people, right? Okay, so people said money, but we could also think about things like accomplishments at work that involve just your own achievements at, doing the job that you do. We could talk about houses. We could talk about all types of physical possession. I think when you say money, you're on the right track here. But I think he's obviously including all those other physical possessions that come with money, that can be purchased with money, right? He's making an obvious statement, right? Even if, does everybody know, oh boy, you probably don't. There was a cartoon called DuckTales. Is anyone familiar with that? I'm really dating myself by raising this cartoon. You're gonna make fun of me. Yeah, so DuckTales, there's a character, Scrooge McDuck, and he's like Scrooge from A Christmas Carol, Dickens. He's all about his money, right? And he's got a gigantic vault, like a bank vault, where he has all these gold coins, and he loves his money more than anything else. And this illustrates the problem. And so what does Scrooge McDuck do? He goes swimming, because it's a cartoon. You can do this in a cartoon. He goes swimming in his gold coins that are like, it's so deep, it's like he's in a swimming pool, because he loves his money, right? Aristotle says you wouldn't even want to live if you didn't also have friends with that money, right? So this guy, Scrooge McDuck, I'm just simplifying, like, he doesn't get it. He doesn't realize that there are things more important than physical goods, like commodities, economic commodities. There are human beings. And Aristotle, absolutely, somebody said it. This is an acknowledgement of our social nature. What do we really need to be happy? We need other human beings. We need connections with them. Now, Aristotle's not going to simply say that having friends makes us happy. He's going to have a very specific conception of friendship. But the point is, he acknowledges that our relationships with human beings are more important than our relationships with our stuff, right? And we got a lot of stuff. We focus a lot on our stuff. But he's also going to be concerned when he looks at friendship in book 8 with a very specific type of relationship with other human beings. It's not just any friendship. And he's not going to call any relationship a friendship. Remember back to the money. Remember the narrator with his buddies on the street? He thought he was friends with those people. But it really kind of turned out that he was just acquainted with them. He wanted them to be good friends, but because those were the people he had around him, right? But it turns out that, like, they didn't really have a connection. They didn't have trust with one another. He took advantage of them, or the friend took advantage of him. And he discovers they're not exactly friends at all. Maybe they're just not friends. They're crooks, right? Okay. So I just want to look, we'll go maybe 10, 15 more minutes. I just want to go to the table of contents here very briefly. So you've got the books 1 through 10. And what's really helpful is this outline that comes, I think, just a few pages before the beginning of the text. Because here, you basically have all the books indicated over here. These numbers here do not represent the 10 books. Actually, the numbers here represent the books and the different sections, the chapters within the books, right? And I want you to look at the arrangement, if you really want to understand this book, because this book is hard to understand, when you this outline provides like a big roadmap for you to understand what's in this book and why it's in there, and some of the meanings of it. And you'll actually start to understand what Aristotle is saying in his conception of human happiness in this outline, right? So he starts out in book one talking about the highest human good. And the highest human good is just another expression for what? What is the highest human good for Aristotle?
Happiness.
And for us? Yeah, that's just his way of talking about happiness, because happiness is a good among many other goods in our lives. A good is just something we think is beneficial for us, right? Nobody is going to deny that happiness isn't a good. It's beneficial. And not only that, nobody's going to deny that it's the highest. It's the most important. Life consists of a hierarchy of goods, and they're not, which means they're not all created equal. Just like not all friendships and relationships are created equal, right? Happiness sits at the top of a kind of pyramidal structure of that hierarchy. And we'll look at that really quickly. Then he talks about virtue and moral virtue. Any thoughts about what virtue is? This is a word we don't use in our modern discussions of our lives so much. But it's a really absolutely crucial word for Aristotle, and we need to know exactly what he means by it. Otherwise, the word's not really going to completely make sense to you when he uses it. Any thoughts about what virtue is?
So like living a decent life.
It absolutely is connected with leading a good, a decent life, a happy life, or achieving happiness. Any thoughts about what it is more specifically?
Like a certain set of standards. Like
It's
that's like
connected with certain standards, absolutely. Any other thoughts? How do we use this word today? When someone is virtuous, what's a synonym for that?
Righteous.
Yeah. So here's the deal. When we think of virtue, we're talking about what Aristotle calls moral virtue, which is to say, the type of person, someone who's morally virtuous, is someone who does the right thing. They are just rather than unjust. They are righteous rather than, base or ignoble or doing the wrong thing. They're good rather than being a scoundrel. But it turns out for Aristotle that moral virtue is just one type of virtue of the goods of the soul, right? A virtue for Aristotle in this situation is a good of the soul. Moral virtue, the person who's righteous, that's like a quality or an attribute of your psychology, right? It's obviously not your body. You don't attribute moral virtue to your body. You attribute to your character and like your heart and mind. Any thoughts about what virtue is without the moral part? So you see, right? The 11 moral virtues, and he lists them. And all of these virtues have to do with acting in the right way, acting courageously, acting with moderation, acting liberally, acting with ambition or greatness of soul, acting in a friendly manner or with gentleness or truthfulness or with justice, right? But he also has another set of virtues that he calls intellectual virtues. intellectual virtues. So we all know what the moral virtues are, even if we didn't read this, like being honest, being fair, being compassionate, following the golden rule. What is the golden rule? Nobody knows what the golden rule of conduct is? Like the main teaching of Jesus in the New Testament?
Loving your neighbor as yourself.
Pardon?
Loving your neighbor as yourself.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you perfectly clearly.
When you love your neighbor as yourself.
Oh, yeah. To love your neighbor as yourself.
Okay.
And the other version of that, I would, because there's two versions of it. And I was thinking of the other one, but to love your neighbor as yourself, which is hard because your neighbor is not necessarily your friend, right? And of course, we all love ourselves best of all, which is exactly why we talked a little bit about self-love at some point, maybe the week before last when we look at Plato's Republic, because everybody wants to do what they want, right? And they love themselves most of all. So loving your neighbor as yourself is actually really hard. And of course, that's why Jesus tells you to do it, because he wants you to take on the challenge. So the golden rule is to do unto others what you would have done to yourself. And that's really a variation of the expression you just gave, right? Do unto others, treat others the way you would like to be treated yourself. That is the golden rule, right? And Aristotle, there's somewhere in the Ethics where he pretty much says the same thing. So he talks, so we know what moral virtues are. We know them even if we haven't used that expression. That's what I'm saying. But there are also intellectual virtues. Any thoughts about what intellectual virtues are? No.
Is it wisdom?
So wisdom is an intellectual virtue. Your character is connected with moral virtue. So yeah, when we use the word character, it's almost exclusively connected with moral virtue, because character is a result of training, habituation. We talked about with the dog, and all that training is moral training, right? Training you to do the right thing in the right situation, because society can't function without it. I mean, not only do you want to be a good person and be happy, but you have to do the right thing for society to function. We saw that in Hobbes. If people can't, if there is no authority over people to have the rewards and punishments to encourage them to do the right thing, we're going to have anarchy, and everybody's going to be living in fear of a violent death. And it doesn't contribute to anybody's happiness. Remember, happiness, the state of nature, as Hobbes described it, he asked, was it a condition of felicity or misery, which is to say human happiness or misery? It's a condition of misery. Why? Because there's no authority there to habituate people to act good. Now, in that instance, we want to act good simply so we can survive and thrive in society. But for Aristotle, now we want to act the right way in order to achieve our own personal happiness, which is something like above and beyond just getting by. Okay, virtue. We need to clarify what the heck virtue is. All right, and I'm going to use these fancy words here. So when Aristotle talks about our human nature, he says we have a body and we have a soul. Simple as that. His concern with understanding our human nature focuses on what our soul is, right? And the biggest thing he says about our soul that distinguishes us from other animals and even plants is that we have a rational soul. And we saw the influence of that, this issue of logos, speech and reason. We saw the influence of that in the politics, by which he talks about how we don't just have feeling, experience pleasure and pain, but we experience the world in moral categories of right and wrong, just and unjust, good and evil, and so on. And therefore, the primary function of politics is to legislate our conception of happiness through legislating what's going to be considered right and what's going to be considered wrong in a society, right? So he says plants, he describes it, plants have what he calls a nutritive soul. And that's a very strange word, a nutritive soul, nutrition, right? Why does he say that? A soul, anything that lives for Aristotle has a soul. The soul is like the animating principle of all living things. So rocks don't have souls. Maybe in Buddhism or something they do, but not in Aristotle. So a plant has a soul because it's alive rather than dead. And the soul signifies it's like life force. It's kind of a, you know, it's not a very scientific by today's standards concept, but you get the idea. So why do plants have a nutritive soul? Because what's the primary thing they do during their life activity? They eat and they grow. They get water and nutrients from the soil, and they get stuff from the sun, and they do photosynthesis, and they get bigger. And they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they die eventually, right? He says the animal has the nutritive part as well because they eat and get bigger, but then they also have perception. And what do animals have perception of? They have perceptions of pleasure and pain, and they have emotions too, right? They have feelings just like humans do. And so then you get to humans, we have a rational soul, but it also means we have all the things the other two have too. We have a nutritive element, meaning we eat and we grow, and we have perception of pleasure and pain, and we seek pleasure and avoid pain. But then we also have reason that allows us to understand the world in moral terms, and to think, and also allows us to understand the world as such, right? If you want to understand Aristotle's conception of happiness, all you need to do is think about the concept of a human being growing. Okay. Happiness has to do with a human being really, quote, growing up. When a plant grows up, it just gets bigger, right? When a human being grows up, they don't just get bigger. When we talk about being a grown, like you think of a kid, you're talking about them, quote, growing up and becoming a grown up. What are we really talking about? We're not talking about them simply physically getting bigger. Like, for example, I'll tell you, when I talk to my daughter about how grown up she is or how she's growing up, she always thinks I'm talking about her height, but I'm not. What do we mean when we talk about a human being growing up and we're not talking about them physically getting bigger? No, definitely more than just getting older. Yeah, being adult. Yeah, so maturity, right? How they think. Yeah, so growing up doesn't mean just getting bigger, and it doesn't mean just getting older. It means, here we're going to use, Giuliani described it as perfecting your own nature. You're not just passing time and getting older. What you're doing is making yourself better. And we would use the word to mature, right? But we're not just, here's the key thing, we're not just maturing physically in body, we're maturing in mind through the use of our reason, through the use of our reason. And if we do it the right way for Aristotle, we're going to achieve our happiness, which is, you could describe it as the perfection of human nature. Taking what nature or God has given us, it's given us a rational soul, and we're going to use it to its fullest potential. We're not just going to go through life and go through the motions of, yeah, get up and do this because I have to do it and the world tells me. No, we're going to seize life by, we're going to seize the day, and we're going to make the most of our potentials, our abilities. And some of those abilities are unique to our own individual person. And some of those abilities are part everyone has. All human beings, when Aristotle says we're the rational animal, I mean, all human beings are rational animals, meaning we're born with the capacity to reason, or at least the ability that can then be cultivated to reason. And what he means to think. Okay. So he says our nature, and the nature of anything, has three components to it. The nature of a thing has a telos, which is a goal, end, or purpose. It has what's called an ergon. It's a fancy word. We'll use it one time. It's a characteristic function. Each thing functions in a certain way, right? Let me go forward here. Okay, good. I use it. And then we have our arete, Greek word arete. And arete means excellence, which is to say the word virtue, this Greek word arete, it is virtue. But what is virtue? Virtue literally means excellence. Excellence. Okay. What is the telos for a human being? Now I'm going to really put you on the spot here. What is the telos for a human being? What is the goal, the ultimate final goal of their life? And it's not to be an astronaut. What is the goal of every human life by definition for Aristotle? I wouldn't use that word success. I mean, you're on the right path, but I would not use that word in this context. What is the goal of every human being? The big ultimate goal of everybody's life? To do what? Folks, don't think too hard. Don't think too hard here. What do we all aspire to achieve as human beings? Yes, happiness. Happiness is what? The highest human good, which is just a fancy way of saying it's the ultimate goal of everybody's life. So what is the telos of our nature is happiness, period. Now, here's the important thing. Animals, for Aristotle, do not have happiness. It is a distinctly human reality or experience, right? Then he says the nature of everything has a certain characteristic function unique to it. And to say that human beings function is rather awkward. What he's really saying is we live a certain way based on our nature. What is the special function of human nature that's distinct from animals and plants? How do we function as human beings that's different from plants and animals?
We have happiness and animals have pleasure.
That's true, but that has to do with our telos. That has to do with the goal of our functioning, right? So what do? We function or we live toward a goal in order to achieve it. And the functioning is going to be activity and living that helps us achieve our goal, right?
Mhm.
How do we function to achieve our goal of happiness, as Aristotle says it? Okay, you've got it. So Mamakade and Ashley, we function rationally.
Mm.
Why is that? Because we have a rational soul. What does he mean when he says we function rationally? Don't think of like Spock from Star Trek. Like we're like computers that like calculate all the time and don't have emotions. He understands emotions are central to our own makeup, right? When he talks about human beings function rationally, he just means to say that our life is defined by the thinking that goes on in our head and the conscious decision making that guides our actions. That's all he's saying, right? And he's not talking about like what's that show with the geeky people, that sitcom in the evening with the geeky people that are always talking about like physics and stuff. Nobody watches that show. I can't remember what it's called. Yeah, The Big Bang Theory. When he talks about us being the rational animal, he's not talking about us all being like the characters on The Big Bang Theory. He's just saying that our life experience and our actions is defined by us thinking and choosing and so on. Okay, here's the simple thing. To say that we act virtuously is simply to say we function excellently. And here's the thing. When you function well, you achieve your goal. Okay, so let's look at an example. This will come together and we'll call it a night in just a second. So let's take I know it sounds strange, but the nature of a knife. The goal of a knife is to cut shit, right? Does anyone want to disagree with that? That's why it's a knife. That's why it's got a sharp edge, to cut things, because you want to cut stuff, right? What is the characteristic activity? It's a little bit redundant, but you start to get the point, and this takes the mystery away from these fancy words, right? So what is the function of the knife? It's cutting, right? So when I say to cut, like the goal of the knife, let's say you have a tomato. The goal of the knife is actually not to cut a little bit, but to actually cut the thing in half, let's say. So what does it actually do in order to achieve that goal? It cuts, or it's the act of cutting. But what allows it to actually succeed in achieving this goal? Now, anybody knows you got a tomato. If you don't have a sharp knife, you ain't cutting that tomato, right? And you're certainly not cutting that tomato well. So we could say the excellence of the knife, because arete is virtue and virtue is excellence. It is the quality of the action. We don't just perform the action, we perform it well. And we perform it well, it actually performs the job. Think about this. Like, there are a whole bunch of quarterbacks in the NFL. They all throw a football, right? But not all of them throw the football and end up winning the Super Bowl. It's only the one that does it truly well, like really well. It actually achieves their ultimate goal, which in the NFL is winning the Super Bowl, right? So what is human happiness for Aristotle? It's winning the Super Bowl. It's utilizing your capacities, your excellences to their fullest ability, your rational capacities. Okay, so let's very quickly look at this passage from the text. And we'll go forward to, and next class we'll spend much more time reading the text, but now we're kind of like situated here. And what we're going to look at here, whoops, I went by it. 7. One second. Let me go up. That's okay. Book 1, chapter 7. I'm sorry. Okay, you know what I got lost is the hard copy book, the pagination is different. The page is on the right side instead of the left. So we're right here. Okay, so it's 9:26. Let's just pick up here. He's trying to describe what happiness is. And he does it by trying to explain the way humans function. And how do they function? They function rationally. And therefore, happiness must have something to do with our rational functioning, because it's something that separates us from plants and animals. So could I have a volunteer read starting? So whatever then this would be. Who could read for us? Ashley, can you read for us?
I'm sorry, where are we?
We're in the highlighted portion here. So whatever then.
Okay, so whatever then would this work be? For living appears to be something common, even to plants. But what is particular to human beings is being sought. One must, I can't even see, so it says set aside then the life characterized by nutrition as well as growth. A certain life characterized by a sense of perception would be next, but it is appears to be common to a horse and cow, and in fact to every animal. So there remains a certain active life of that which possesses reason, and what possesses reason includes what is obedient to reason on the one hand, and what possesses it and thinks on the other. But since this life of reason in the second sense also is spoken of in twofold way, one must, I don't know what that says. It's P-O, I can't.
One must posit the life.
Posit the life of that which possesses reason in accord with an activity. For this seems to be its more authoritative meaning. And if the work of human beings, I'm sorry, is the background too loud for you
It's
guys?
a little bit loud, yeah.
I'm sorry, it's my son. If you want me to stop, I could. If not, I can continue.
And if?
And if the work of a human being is an activity of soul in a, I'm sorry, my baby's gonna keep calling me, in accord with reason, or not without reason, and we assert that the work of a given person is the same in kind as that of a serious person, just as it would be in the case of, I'm not sure what word
As
that is.
Kithara player.
Kithara player, and a serious Kithara player, and this would be so in all cases, simply when the superiority in accord with the virtue is added to the work, for it belongs to a
Kithara player.
Kithara player to play in the Kithara, but to a serious one to do so well. But if this is so, and we pose it work, okay. What just happened?
And we posit the work of a human being as a certain life.
And this is an activity of the soul and actions accompanied by reason. The work of a serious man being to do these things well nobly, and each thing is brought to completion well in accord with the virtue proper to it. If this is so, then the human good becomes an activity of soul in accord with virtue. And if there are several virtues, then in accord with the best and most complete one.
Okay, great. Now I'm going to read. You did it. You get a gold star for that. That's challenging. Okay. So let me mute for a second. All righty. So he brings up, this is a very funny thing he does. So he brings up a Kithara player. Okay, let's not get lost here. A Kithara is a certain type of a Greek harp, right? And he talks about someone, not just any Kithara player or not just any quarterback, but a serious one, right? And he talks about, where is it here? He says, for it belongs to a kithera player to play the kithera, but to a serious one to do so well. So this is a musician with an instrument, and there are a lot of people who play the instrument, but there's only some who do it well. Or what's the word? Only some who do it excellently. Only some who do it virtuously. Does everybody get that? Okay. How do you want to live your life? Do you want to just live it and go through the motions? Or do you want to live it well and excellently? Duh. Who's going to say, I don't want to live it well? You don't want to just live. You don't want to just get by. You want to live the best you possibly can. And that's another way of saying you want to live virtuously. So that's one element of why he's talking about this musician. Because, well, the flip side of it is a lot of us just live. A lot of us just go through the motions. And for Aristotle, someone who is happy is someone who is what's another name for happiness? Now that we understand what virtue is, another name for human happiness is human excellence, living excellently, full stop. That's it. That's what his definition is. And he's got a specific meaning as to what is excellent how. We'll come to that. The other thing is the kithera, the musician, literally has an instrument that he wants to play well. And there's a reason, he doesn't tell you, but there's a reason, another reason why he's talking about this musician. What is the quote unquote instrument that all human beings have that is part of their living and activity and functioning? It's not a physical instrument that we hold in our hands. What is the instrument we use that helps, or for better and worse, or better, we use it better or worse? What is the instrument we use to live for Aristotle as a human being? Two more minutes and we're done here. What is the instrument we have? You might not call it an instrument, but I'm trying to make the connection here with this musician. Another word for our mind. You're absolutely right, our mind. What does our mind do as per Aristotle? What do we do with our mind? We blank. Another word than think. Another word starts with an R. Oh, come on, folks, let's get it done. Yes, we reason. We reason. We're the rational animal. What is the essence of how we live? We live rationally, by which we simply mean we live by utilizing our rational faculties. That doesn't mean we don't have emotions. It doesn't mean some people reason better than worse. It doesn't mean we're acting like a computer, or acting like Spock or something like that, or people on the Big Bang Theory. Reason is our instrument. If we use our instrument well, we live excellently and we achieve happiness. And living excellently is really the same thing as happiness. They're synonymous. There's no real difference. Okay. So what does he say happiness is? If we come down to this line, if this is so, then the human good. This is Aristotle. I'm sorry, he's challenging. What does he mean by the expression the human good? Not a human good, but the human good. What is he talking about here? What is the human good? What is the good human beings aspire to? Happiness. Okay, this is the catch. When he says this expression right here, and he says the human good, he's talking about happiness. And the first time you read this, it's obvious, it's not obvious. He says, if everything that I've just said is true, he says human happiness, aka the human good, becomes an activity of soul in accord with virtue. Who speaks this way? Activity of soul in accord with virtue. Can anyone translate what he means by an activity of soul in accord with virtue? So into plain English, what does he mean by that? Human happiness becomes or is what? Okay, I'm going to say it because we want to get out of here. The human good becomes, let's put it this way, living virtuously. Activity of soul, that's just another, aka living. Because how do we live? Yes, we have our bodies, but our bodies are guided by our souls and their activity, and it's rational activity. The human good is living rationally and living excellently. And then he says, if there are several virtues, then living in accord with the best and most complete one. So happiness is living virtuously. But here's the catch. There's more than one type of virtue. And being happy means living in accord with the highest type of virtue. What are the two types of virtues that are candidates for human happiness? What are the types of virtue? What are the types of human excellences that are candidates for human happiness? Any thoughts? Okay, people want to get going. I get it. All right, this one sentence. First sentence of book 2. Virtue, aka human excellence, then is twofold, meaning there are two types of virtues. There are intellectual virtues and there are moral virtues. So guess what? Which is the highest form of virtue? He says happiness is living virtuously. But if there are more than one type of virtue, it's living with the best and most complete, in accord with the best and most complete virtue. But he still hasn't told you which one it is. And guess what? He doesn't tell you what the best type of human virtue is until book 10. Haha. What's the answer? For Aristotle, what's the highest form of human virtue? Which type, moral or intellectual? What's the highest, most complete form of virtue? Is it moral virtue or is it intellectual virtue? Okay, you know what? We're going to answer that next class before we move into our discussion of friendship. And I want everybody to make a mental note. Answer this question. The answer is in book 10, which is why I had you read books 1 and 10. Okay. Any business questions, or shall we call it a night here? I think everybody wants to go.
Professor, I do have a question about the books.
Yes.
So I try to like